So I would like to start. Hello and welcome to another video interview, which is a part of this series ECMI Conversation with Experts. Each episode, we invite a prominent expert in the field of minority studies to discuss a specific topic with one of the ECMI researchers. My name is Viktoria Aygül. I'm a researcher at the ECMI. And I'm delighted that today I can talk to Dr. Hakob Matevosyan, who is from the Center for East European and International Studies, ZOiS in Berlin, about the transmission of historical views across two generations of Russian minority in Germany, Estonia, and Canada. Welcome, Hakob.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
So a little bit about you, also to add that Hakob is a research associate at the Center for the East European and International Studies, as I mentioned, in Berlin. He specializes in migration and mobility with a keen interest in how post-Soviet legacies influence contemporary social political landscapes in Eastern Europe. His extensive research contributes to our understanding of cultural identities and the complexities of migration within and beyond the post-Soviet space, which is very relevant to what the ECMI is also doing and working on, and in particular to my research interest as well, because I'm also working on Russian speakers, for example, in Germany and Latvia, and elsewhere in Europe. So we definitely could see many intersecting points with your research, especially when it comes to the issue of transmission of historical memory and generally integration of Russian diaspora abroad. So now I would like to pass the floor to Hakob to talk about his research on the identity and diaspora studies. I know that you have been working for a long time on this topic and proceeding from the Armenian diaspora in Hungary to the Russian one in Germany, Canada, and Estonia. So could you please let us know about your work, your working path, and maybe a little bit on the working definitions that you frequently use in your research?
Thank you, Victoria, for your kind introduction, and I'm really happy to talk to you, as you mentioned, also for many reasons, but particularly we have a lot of research interests that come together, so I think we're going to have an interesting discussion around different topics. Yeah, you're absolutely right in your observations when you say I started with Armenian diaspora in Central Europe, with a particular case study of Hungary, and then I moved to Russian diaspora. But let me just go back a bit and then also answer your question about working definitions, because I think you brought in an interesting aspect also, like working definition, identities, cultural identities, then diaspora, but also from the other side, there is the term minority that your research institution uses. So maybe we can discuss a little bit and then move to the other parts. When I was doing my research in Hungary back then, which is already a decade ago, actually, I started in 2015, I started with very small research question at that point, which was to understand the cultural identities of people who have migration background, but not necessarily recent migration background, but migration background goes back to the centuries. So I started interviewing those people whose families moved to the territory of current Hungary in the 17th, in the 18th century, but somehow they kept the Armenian cultural identity, at least according to their claims. This was part of the story that I wanted to unpack in the first line. In the second line, why this kind of identity is in conflict with other Armenian identities within this diasporic space, because there is a post-Soviet migration, there is a Soviet migration from Soviet spaces, not only necessarily Armenia, but also some other Soviet republics, to socialist Hungary, and there was also the genocide of 1915, which triggered another wave of Armenians. So there were different layers of diasporas that were having a bit of symbolic conflict. What is Armenian identity? Because everyone was claiming their own way of, or their own version of being Armenian. So pretty much I was buying the argument by the diaspora scholars that this is a typical diaspora non-homogeneous diaspora where, we have different cultural products, different spaces that produce different variations. And then there was another challenge at that point because all this identity conflict started with a Hungarian law, which is called minority law. The term minority is also in the background of the research, and I started to work with the minority law and claim understanding, minority diaspora, because these are from the first side, two easy words or terms to distinguish and claim this is the minority and this is diaspora when it comes to maybe conceptual, without diving into conceptual deep discussions, but saying minorities for those who are in small numbers versus majority population. And diaspora, at least in my understanding at that moment, was more about cultural production, a space where cultural identities are being produced, not necessarily going into the numbers, this is a small number of people or versus majority people. But then I came across with a publication of Rogers Brubaker, a very early publications. When he was doing research in the early 90s, and he has a quite interesting discussion of minorities versus diasporas. Particularly for him, minorities are related to political discourse of the country, which means the existence of minority means that the nation state failed actually to nationalize, to integrate those people. So and I was pretty much buying this argument, claiming I don't want to go into those discourses where, state intervenes to say you stay as a minority, but I try to integrate. But then at the end of the day, state failed actually to nationalize, to integrate into big canon, be it cultural, be it political, whatsoever, but rather to see, okay, we have a group, and then we have a host society, and then we have a minority or diaspora group, whatever is that, a group that is, in a triangular relationship with one another. So I thought maybe that's the angle to see, and then instead of focusing on the countries receiving sending societies, but rather to focus on a group and see what is happening within that particular group. So that was my empirical approach, an ethnographic approach, to zoom into a group, to identify different actors, to identify different people who have different migration backgrounds, but also different understandings of being Armenian, of being half Armenian, of being 12% of Armenian whatsoever, and how these different variations of cultural identities come into one diasporic space, particularly with regard to integration. As I mentioned at the beginning, the one group of my study group were not a minority anymore because they were equally Hungarian as well. So they were fully integrated. So using a minority was a bit of difficult for me to adapt, to these perceptions. Therefore, I used diasporic space as a space of production of cultural identities, but also space of struggle to position themselves vis-a-vis homeland. That could be Armenia, but that could be also imagined Armenia because, in 17th and 18th century, Armenia was somewhere else. So maybe this was a bit of the back then what I was doing for my PhD studies, and I used qualitative methodologies, interviews, observations, participant observations. And then for my current job at ZOiS, I switched the camps, so to say, from qualitative traditions to quantitative, to surveys, but also from one particular diaspora in East Central Europe to another diaspora that is Russian diaspora, and we can unpack that a bit later, in 3 countries: Germany, Estonia, and Canada. I hope this is
I
an
think,
answer to your question.
I got a lot of ideas in parallel because I was thinking, okay, for the ECMI, I think the definition of minorities is other way around. It's overarching definition that integrates not only the traditional minorities recognized by the German state, for example, that we know as Danish, Frisian, Sorbian, and Sinti and Roma, but also like the new minorities, the newcomers, so to say, that are not officially recognized, but we still do some research on those groups as well. That's why it's also interesting to talk to you today. Thank you very much. Yes, so maybe you could then talk a little bit more about the projects at ZOiS that you are working on currently, because as you mentioned, you switched a little bit your focus, but still, I think there are a lot of intersections, right? With also Armenians are maybe also integrated in the group of Russian speakers or Russian minority, or would you separate here?
Yeah, very interesting question, Victoria. When I said I switched to another case study within the methodology, definitely certain things stayed. So my interest in diasporas, my interest in identities, my interest in belonging, of course, with different research questions, of course, with different data, and of course, with different angle that I'm currently studying. My main position at ZOiS is related to ERC-funded project Moving Russians, intergenerational transmission of historical memories abroad and at home, with a very interesting abbreviation, MOVEMERU. So this is what we use as a branding name for us, for our team as well, but also for the promotion for our project. And in the project, we do have three research questions that we want to answer, which here you will see maybe a bit of difference what I was describing for my previous research. The first research question that I want to unpack is, to what extent do young adults in migrant and non-migrant families identify with their parental homeland, and also what kind of historical narratives are included in this identification, alignment or non-alignment. This is the first research question. The second research question that our team works on is, under what conditions do historical memories and political attitudes of young people, again within families of migration, with migration background and without migration background, converge or diverge from their parents' political attitudes and historical memories. So particularly in the second research question, we focus on family converges and diverges between two different generations. And the third research question covers what kind of historical memories are conductive for pluralistic society, and also solidarity, with a question mark, unpacking historical memories vis-a-vis societal developments. These are the major research questions that we try to answer in three working packages, aligned or defined across different methodologies. The first working package that I'm coordinating with Felix Kavacek, who is the PI of the overall project, is intergenerational surveys. So intergenerational surveys, and then the second working package deals with intergenerational focus group discussions, so qualitative data in this particular case. And the third working package deals with media studies using different methods, both media sources, but also interviews with different generations, also with first and second generations here. This is the overall description, and of course, our particular focus is on, as you mentioned, people with Soviet Russian background. And here we have differences, how we define Soviet Russian background vis-a-vis Russian speaking or vis-a-vis Russian diaspora, because all of them have different nuances, and we try to bring into one research agenda, which therefore we came up with the definition people with Soviet Russian background. And here the focus is on socialization. So what do? We have two generations within one family that we interviewed, both in the surveys and also in focus group discussions. So the first generation, the parental generation, went for us as a criteria for our interviews, went primary socialization in Soviet Russia or Russia, which means at least they spent the schooling years in Soviet Russia or Russia at the age of 7 until the age of 18. Here we want to understand what kind of state narratives they learned at school. And the second generation, the young adults, went primary socialization in the diasporic spaces already in Canada, in Germany, and Estonia, if they were born in those countries or they moved to those countries under the age of 11. So which means for us, the primary socialization with regard to schooling years, the younger generation underwent in the diasporic spaces. These are the major definitions for us, as you see. So it's not about ethnicity. It's not about only ethnic Russian diasporas or only Russian-speaking people, but nevertheless, so anyone who went Russian socialization or Soviet Russian socialization and actually migrated to any of the three countries, and then have a child at the age of 18 to 34 who was socialized in or currently resides in the three countries, Estonia, Canada, and Germany.
Right. I was just an immediate question following up on what you have just said. Did you have any cross-cutting findings along the three groups? Those Russian speakers in Estonia, Germany, and Canada in the younger generation, because apparently they have. No, I would expect that they develop differently in a sense, being in Germany or in Canada, because the societies are completely different, diasporas are completely different, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You're very right with your observation. And maybe I have to clarify that, of course, we have three countries, and the comparison will take a bit longer in terms of, it's not that easy, as you also correctly mentioned, to compare the three different contexts. Maybe it makes sense to explain that why the three different countries, because Estonia has another political and cultural history than Germany and also than Canada. But for us, the three countries represent three different political and cultural spaces for diaspora. For diasporas, for instance, in Germany, we not only have those Russian or Soviet socialized people, but we also have another dimension, very strong dimension here. For instance, Germans who were repatriated to current Germany. Those are the late resettlers in Germany, a very tiny group, of course, but in our sample. But nevertheless, our research is not narrowed down to them, but anyone who was socialized, and they're among those who were socialized in Soviet Russia. And then we have Jewish contingent refugees who also are part of our sample. Therefore, there are nuances that we have to consider from one country to another country. If we move to Estonia, for instance, then we see not only two generations, but at least three generations of Russians, particularly, or the ones who were socialized in Soviet Russia, were relocated or live currently in Estonia. So, and here we have more I wouldn't say interesting, but another constellation for society, right? There is a 23% to up to 25% of Russian-speaking population in the country versus to Estonian-speaking population. There we can see already linguistic divide between Russian-speaking and Estonian-speaking population. And Canada is another country which brings another dimension when it comes to cultural and socio-political context of diaspora groups. It is their multiculturalism. So, which means as a political entity, Canada invites those people without heavy assimilation programs or exclusion of minority groups, of diaspora groups, but rather those groups who go to Canada, they have the right of multiculturalism, which means they can keep their own culture, but nevertheless be socio-politically integrated into the Canadian society. So these three countries introduce three different cases for us. Therefore, making a very cross-country comparison might be a bit difficult at this stage. But what I would say, we already have two products per country. So we have one country report for Germany and also one country report for Canada. So they are already published. So if you're interested, so those are here, two reports, a bit of promotion of our products. So you can download from our website, and another country report for Estonia will be published hopefully by the end of this year. So in the late autumn months, and there we can see already the tendencies of the three diaspora groups and vis-a-vis comparison to the national reference population. Maybe this is also a very important aspect to mention, that it's, as I mentioned, the research questions, the three research questions what we have, they're not limited only to people with Soviet Russian background, like those with migration background, but we put comparison people with migration, without migration.
Very interesting. I was wondering whether it was difficult to reach the target groups during your research. How did you manage to get your interviewees?
Very, very important question. I think the methodology should be also part of the overall discussion. What we did, we cooperated with local partners in three countries, and we worked for a couple of months to develop the questionnaire because we wanted to have comparative aspect in any case based on the questionnaire. So we approximately, I would say 80% of the questions are asked in all three countries, with a 20% of the variation based on the country-specific questions and group-specific questions in each of the countries. And our local partners in 3 countries, they're leading research institutions, opinion polling institutions, with whom we had weekly discussions of the questions and also understanding the local context before we translated the overall questionnaire into the working languages in all countries. So we have 5 working languages because people are allowed to, or people are given the chance to answer the questions in their favorite language or the language that they feel more comfortable. But when it comes to the difficulties, of course, the difficulties are always part of the academic journey, and we have to be creative to solve those issues. The 3 countries represented also 3 different settings of collecting information. Let me start with Canada, because there is online panel. As a multicultural country, there are a lot of public opinion institutions who deal with people with migration background, which also brings a possibility of having online panels to recruit people with Soviet Russian background in this particular case. So there was a panel that we cooperated, and our cooperation partner Legacies cooperated with another partner in Canada, Decision Point Research, to collect the data. And in Canada, there was no any big problem. I would say it went smoothly. We collected the data last year in the spring before the summer, so it was done. In Germany, our partner was DMOP institution, and I have to mention their professionalism in this particular case, because on a weekly basis with them as well, with Legacies as well, and also with our partners in Estonia, Institute for the Baltic Studies, we were able to tailor the questions on a weekly basis, discussions, and also how to recruit those people. And of course, Germany is a little bit different as a country. There's a representative sample, the representative online panel that we successfully collected all the information for national reference population, for the German population, and also for a part of the interviews were conducted from their own panel, from the panel of TeamUp. And for the Soviet Russian background population, so we had to be creative to, to promote the project and to make explanatory videos to promote what we do, how we do. It was not a difficult thing, because I think the professionalism of our local partners and also constant exchange with us gave very good results, very, very nice results, because at the end of the day, who participated in research, so you can imagine those investing 30 minutes of their time answering our questions. So this is already showing a dedication and also the interest of the people, that wanted to really answer the question. Putting aside the incentives, of course, there's an incentive that people could be attracted to, but nevertheless, answering half an hour, questionnaire, this is already a dedication. Therefore, I think there was a high value of this data, what we have collected, at least to our knowledge. This is the best one, not to speak too many positive things about our own research, but nevertheless, we managed to collect also data from Soviet Russian background population in Germany and in Estonia. So this is an interesting case for us, and also lessons learned. We thought that this is going to be the easiest data collection from the 3 cases, because given the fact that there is 25% of, or 23% of the population is Russian speaking. But nevertheless, given certain political implications in the country, we've faced some difficulties in terms of getting contacts from national population register from Estonia. So even though our application was approved, but then they revoked our application, so we had to reapply application. And also, of course, the war in the Ukraine, Russia's war in the Ukraine, so triggered some fears. With this kind of historical questions, you can imagine, if asking what kind of associations you have with certain period of Soviet Union. So in there we had different dynamics, of course. But at the end of the day, our local partners, Institute for Baltic Studies in Tartu, so they were managed to collect, in cooperation with us, collect the necessary amount of survey interviews. But as I mentioned, so these are 3 different contexts, and also 3 different data collection spaces. We learned so many things, about the societies, but also how to collect data in, difficult times and difficult societies. Not to be very naive, I would say that, there is something going to be very easy.
Right,
There could be
right.
a lot of surprises. Sorry if I'm
Yeah.
talking too much. You can all the time interrupt me, and then
No, it's very interesting. I mean, as I mentioned, I also faced certain challenges while researching the Russian speakers in Germany. So it's also has to do a lot with collecting the data and people unwilling to answer certain questions or certain backgrounds they have, you know. So yeah, it's super interesting, and of course, it's interesting to see how are you going to develop your project further. Are there any plans for the future? Maybe cross-cutting analysis of the whole data sets you have, as you mentioned already.
yeah, definitely. Here, I have to use maybe the very beautiful description of our PI, Felix Krawacek, who recently mentioned that. So imagine that we're climbing a mountain. And we are at the peak at the moment, which means the data collection is done not only in this working package, intergenerational surveys, but also focus group discussion and also media working package. So all the data collection is done. So, and we're very happy for that. And currently we are digesting the data, producing scientific articles, analyzing the data, seeing different trends, but also publishing reports, as I mentioned earlier. So we're currently in the phase of publishing, understanding the data and seeing what we have, and then we'll move on somehow. Um, that is current agenda for us, to digest and maybe come down from the mountain and then have more research outcomes based on the data that we have generated. Because imagine, maybe another point to mention, imagine we ask two generations within a family to participate in our survey. It's not only just individuals who participated, but if the parent participated, we ask to forward the link to their young adults, and the other way around. So if the young adult participated, we ask to forward the link of the survey to their parents. So which means we have a lot of generational dynamics also to explore, which is currently happening. My colleagues and I were analyzing, producing different academic texts, journal articles. Yeah, maybe that's what will be keeping us busy in the next months.
Yeah, that could be another talk for sure on the topic of how the intergenerational connection is working, how the transfer is working, right? Through the
Absolutely. So we're currently
generation.
trying to understand the mechanisms, for instance, of intergenerational transmission of political views and historical views, which families are successful in transmitting which political identities those families have, and which historical memory is being easily transmitted, who is more successful transmitting fathers or mothers to their daughters or to their sons. So there are so many interesting dimensions, and also maybe a very important moment for me, myself being in another country at the moment. So maybe this is a process of becoming a diaspora, and not really,
Yeah.
but a very fun part of it. There are a lot of questions in research that resonates with my own everyday life. To think what kind of questions are, or what kind of historical moments are really shaping my own identity. But this is maybe a personal moment to connect to the project. So there are so many interesting findings, I would say.
Right. I think it works the best when you have a personal connection. So
Yeah,
it's for me
I
very
also think.
important. Yes, yes. All right, thank you very much. I would like to thank Hakob for a very interesting and insightful interview, and of course, our viewers today for their time. For more interesting information on what the ECMI does, please follow us on our social media and visit our website www.ecmi.de. Stay tuned for our next episode, and until then, goodbye.